something. Emergency faith is not something that needs to be maintained. It's something that's embedded in the soul of every Jew, and it comes out in case of emergency. It comes when the person, when the Jewish faith is pushed. Like we see stories of great self-sacrifice all throughout the ages. Then there's another level of faith which we're trying to achieve, which is what this class is primarily about, and what the 13 principles are primarily about. And that's a faith that needs to be maintained. It needs to be maintained constantly. And if it's not being maintained constantly, so then it's waning. Then you're falling back on the emergency faith. One of the things that I didn't clarify last time, which it's important that I do before we begin, is that faith is not blind, or at least it's not supposed to. Faith on the one hand is remembering something that we already know, and then believing in something that we also already know. What does that mean? It means that when the neshama, the soul, our souls live in the presence of God in heaven. So all of these things are known. All these things are known. You don't have to have faith in the existence of God because God is everywhere. He's everything. There's no need for a leap of faith. And from when all of our souls were created, thousands and thousands of years ago, we have been living this reality all of this time, except for the short lifespan that each of our souls descended into this world for, however many that was. 70 years here, 100 years there, 50 years there. Aside from the very short lifespans, relatively speaking, to the thousands of years of the lifespan of our souls, our souls have lived in heaven close to God and have felt and perceived and seen and experienced God on a daily basis. And so therefore faith is not something that needs to be explained to the soul. It's just something that needs to be reminded to the soul. In other words, to remind the soul of something that it already knows. And that's why when push comes to shove, when something sort of come to a place of emergency, or a moment of self-sacrifice, or a point where the soul is being pushed beyond, and it can't anymore, so then it comes out. But our job, or our objective is in order to have that level of faith on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis, without having to be pushed, without having to be brought to extreme situations, where the soul has to be sort of yanked out of its shell. But rather that type of faith should be constantly present in our lives, in order to help us through all the things that we do. Now, this is not a job, this is a gift. It's a gift because if we understood everything, so then we could rationalize and we could decide what works for us and what doesn't. If everything was taken on faith, so then we wouldn't really be able to make much of it relevant, and certainly also not communicate it to our children and to the people around us. And so therefore faith is a balance between what we know and what we can't know. It's our obligation, it's our duty, we're best served when we know as much as we can, because the more that we know, the more it strengthens the other side of things that we can't know. And then the other half is what we can't know, and that's always present. And that balance creates faith that's unique to Judaism, where on the one hand it's not blind, but on the other hand, there is things that we take on faith. It's therefore each one of the 13 principles has two parts to it. There's what we could understand and what we could know, And then we can understand what we don't know or what we can't understand and what we have to take on faith. And then all of that, from that point onwards, those are the things that we take on faith. Now, what are the important reasons why it's necessary, both for ourselves and for others, that we understand as much as we can? So first of all, like I said, it's simply because of relevance. In order to make any of this relevant in our lives, it has to connect in one way or another to something that happens or something that we do, something that we need to do in our daily life. If it's completely disconnected from our daily life and it's just belief in something that is completely detached from me and detached and disconnected from what my life, from the things that go on in my life on a daily basis, so then it's very difficult to connect to. It's very difficult to make relevant in my personal life. If faith or if God's presence isn't something that's supposed to help me, or that doesn't in reality help me with my day-to-day struggles, so then it's very difficult to actually connect with it in a way that's meaningful. It's just something that sort of exists in the heavens, it exists in the abstract. But if God's presence in my life is supposed to help me, not only practically, not only theoretically or theologically, but also on a practical level, we believe that God is involved in every single thing that goes on in the world to the smallest, minutest detail. So then that means that I'm relevant to God and my life is relevant to God. And if I'm struggling with something, then that's also relevant to Him. If we believe that, so then that's something that we can lean on in our daily struggle. We could also believe that the daily struggle is there and placed there by God, that it's orchestrated by God, and it's all there for a certain specific reason. All of this only exists, all of this is only real if we know as much as we can and then believe the rest. The other reason why it's very important to understand as much as we can is because if we're going to translate this to someone else, if we're going to pass this along to other people, namely our children or our family, our friends, or anyone around us, so there has to be a certain amount that we understand, and to be able to explain the faith that we have to others, not necessarily explain everything about the faith. In other words, not necessarily explain everything we believe, because like I said, there are certain things we can't understand and we can't know. But you can explain everything that you can know, and then you can explain what we can't know and why. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing when you can explain to someone why I believe something, even though this is something that I take on faith, than just saying, I just believe whatever it says and just blindly, I just follow whatever it says in the book. If you want to translate relevance, or you want to give over relevance to someone else, or explain why this is relevant and important in their life, so then it has to be relevant and important in your life. If it doesn't, so then you're just passing along dry information. It's just, it doesn't connect. So it's very important for us, for ourselves, to have the relevance and to understand as much as we can. And then also to be able to hand over to someone else. Another thing that is important, that I'll be stressing on throughout all of the explanations of the 13 principles, is that there's two different ways, and I touched on this a little bit last time, is that there's two different ways of translating the word mitzvah. You have the word mitzvah can be translated literally as tziva, Moshe, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, that Hashem commanded the Torah to the Jewish people. Or tzivoy, a commandment, tzav, all comes from the same source, as a commandment, as a direction, as a directive. And then there's another way of understanding or translating the word, and that's based on the Aramaic word, which is tzavsa. So you have mitzvah, which comes from the word tziva, which is commandment, and then you have mitzvah, which comes from the word tzavsa, which is Aramaic for connection. And so therefore, while all of the mitzvahs in the Torah are commandments, and neither one of these translations are correct or more or less correct than the other, they're both 100% true. The mitzvah, the commandment part of the mitzvah is the basic understanding. This is what we start with. That's why it's the simple understanding. That's why it's the translation of the word. That's why it's the simple translation of the word. Just 1 second. But then as we get older and wiser, hopefully, so then we need to connect. It needs to be personal, it needs to be relevant. And so therefore, it's not enough anymore that there's just, when we're young children, so then it's enough to say, or when we're just starting to learn, it's enough to say, this is what God commanded us to do. And that's it. And that's why we do it. And that's important as a foundation. I'm not dismissing that. It's very important. It's a layer. It's a real layer, and it's important because there will be always things that we struggle with, and there will be always things that we don't understand. And so therefore, we always have to have that first layer to fall back on, that if we don't understand something for a period of time, or there's just something that we just can't understand, then we still do things because God told us to do it. But we have to try as much as possible to connect with everything that we learn and everything that we do, and to understand the why. For a number of reasons. First of all, like I said before, and it's in order for it to be relevant to us and for it to stay personal to us. Also to be able to give it over to our children and others. But also it's important for it to keep alive. In other words, if we're doing the same thing every day by rote, even if we understand why we do it, it's what's called mitzvah sanashim melumada. It's something that someone does robotically after a while. Even if you understand the reason why we do all of the things that we do, if you do it every single year, or every single day for those reasons, so then it'll become dry and bland. The same way that you do it just because God told you to do it. Make sense? Again, if a person is doing the same thing for the same reason, even though it's a logical reason that you understand, that you learned, but you're still doing it this year and the year before and the year before that, all for the same reason, over time it's going to become by rote, it's going to become mechanical, it's going to become robotic, and it's going to take on the same amount of life or excitement as doing it just because God said so. And so therefore we constantly need to be deepening our understanding and our connection. Relationships that are left slide backwards. If they're not maintained, they slide backwards, they wane, they fade. And that doesn't mean they disappear, it just means that they need to be refreshed. And so therefore, relationship with God, even more so, is a struggle. It's a struggle of faith and so on, because God is abstract and intangible and so on. And so therefore, we have to be constantly reminding ourselves that he exists and that he's here and that he's present in our lives and that he's relevant in our lives, and it's not abstract and it's not in the heavens, but that God is here in every single thing that we do. And that's why, from the Chassidic perspective at least, the 13 principles are really things that we're supposed to be reminded of remind ourselves of every single day, that God is relevant in our daily lives, in every single thing that we do. And that's the struggle. The struggle is to remind ourselves that God is here, just like this table is here and I'm sitting on the chair. And as a matter of fact, God is here more than the table is here and than the chair that I'm sitting on. And so therefore, every single thing every mitzvah that we talk about, there's a commandment aspect or element, and then there's a tzafsa element. And all of the 13 principles can be understood as do this because God runs the world and he's in charge and he's the boss and that's it. And you don't have a choice. But then there's another way of looking at it, which is the tzafsa angle, which is an opportunity to see how God is not far and not abstract and not distant and so on, but rather very much close to every single person in their experience. Yeah.
Can you just spell the Aramaic word for connection?
Tzadik vav vav taf aleph. Tzadik vav vav, two vavs, saf aleph.
Take your soft and soft
Aleph.
That, like that.
English.
It's phonetic.
I know, but I'm
T?
having time hearing it.
TZ.
The TZAV, the TA or SA, depending on your pronunciation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's get into the first principle. Where are we? Okay, so I'm going to check on the handouts for this class, but in the meantime, in the Mashiach and Gula booklet that you have for Rabbi Jeske's class, on the first page, there's a list of the 13 principles together with translation. So I'll read out the first principle. It says in the Hebrew and then in the English. It says Ani Ma'ameh B'Emunah Shlema, and this is how all the principles start off. That I believe with complete faith. So I'm going to read this in English, and then I'm going to ask you all to please tell me in your own words, what are we supposed to believe? So Ani Ma'ameh, I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed is His name. And again, that's the standard beginning of all of the 13 I believes. That He creates and guides all creatures, and that He alone made, makes, and will make everything. What are we supposed to believe from this principle? I'll read it one more time. I believe with complete faith that God creates and guides all creatures, and that He alone made, makes, and will make everything. What are we supposed to believe? What is the fundamental belief or faith thing here? There's one guy. You saying you agree? Anyone else?
That He's creating the world every second.
So you're talking about belief in God. You're saying that the first principle is belief in His existence. Is that what you're saying? And you're saying belief in that He creates the world. Okay. Any other opinions?
Creating all the time.
Creating and creates and creating and will create all the time. Okay. So this is two fundamentally different things. Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in? No. Okay. So if you go to most translations, or not literal translations, but if you look at if you go to most websites and you'll Google 13 principles of faith, even if you're looking at a proper reputable source, you will find that most people translate the first principle like you guys did, that it's belief in God. And that makes sense. That makes sense to start off the 13 principles with belief in God, because and we're talking about faith here, we're talking about belief. So the first thing that we should believe, the first thing that Jews believe, is we believe in God. So it makes sense that we should start off with the first one with that. And that's how it sounds. And that's how a lot of people translate it, or at least paraphrase it. But really, if you spend a minute thinking about it, it really makes very little sense that I should write a book in which I should write their principles of faith. I should write a book that outlines my religion, the religion that I made up. And then in that book, I should make a list of fundamentals of faith. And the first fundamental of faith should be to believe in me. If you are reading the book and you don't necessarily believe in the faith, or you don't believe in me, you don't believe that I have a right to make a faith, so then why would you listen to a book that I wrote that says you should believe in me? Does that make sense? It's like if you speak to missionaries, which I don't recommend that you do. When you speak to missionaries, they'll tell you somewhere in the conversation that the reason why this is true, what it says in this verse, and wherever, the Old or the New Testament, is because if you look later on in the New Testament, it says that this is what it means, and that's what we're saying. So you're taking a book that you wrote and you're bringing proofs from the end of the book for the beginning of the book. Of course, you bring proofs for your own book. You wrote it. So if I don't believe in God, then I certainly don't believe that he wrote the Torah. And I certainly don't believe that he gave it to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai or any other variation. And so therefore, if you're going to come to me and you're going to say that the God that you don't believe in the Torah that he didn't write, says that you should believe in him. That doesn't really fly. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so therefore, according to most commentaries, the first principle is not belief in God. Belief in God is a prerequisite. Either you believe or you don't believe. If you choose, and it's a choice. It's a choice. If you choose to believe, so then great. So then we can talk about, so if you believe that God exists, that you believe that he wrote a Torah and he gave it to the Jewish people and so on and so forth. So then you take that on faith, you believe all that is true. So then we can talk about what are the fundamentals of that faith that God handed down to the Jewish people and on Sinai and so on and so forth. If you don't believe, so then anything else I'm going to say from this point forward is completely irrelevant because maybe he doesn't exist. And so therefore, maybe whatever you're saying is just, you just made up. Or the rabbis wrote it, or somebody convinced someone of something thousands of years ago, and we're still stuck in this reality. Yeah.
So how do you develop belief?
So like I said in the introduction, a soul that lived for thousands of years next to God doesn't need anything to believe. For thousands of years, you were looking at God's reality and experiencing God's reality every single day.
So, but what do you say to people who say that they don't believe?
They do. They're just not in touch. You don't necessarily say that to them, but I'm telling you the answer. The answer is that when the soul descends into this world, so it's placed out, there's so many layers, there's so many blankets, so to speak, that it's completely, it becomes completely immobile. It becomes trapped almost. And all of the layers of physicality and materialism that the soul is sort of trying to get through is very difficult. It's very difficult. And so therefore it's difficult to hear. It's very difficult to hear your soul unless you nurture it and you raise it and so on. I mean, think about it. You have a little baby. The baby doesn't know how to walk, doesn't know how to talk, has a very small voice and so on. So that's the way the soul comes into the world. Of course, the soul is not a baby. The soul has been around for thousands of years, but because of all the things that are stacked against it, so to speak, the living soul and the body, and then all this, the world around us, and so on. All of this is sort of weighing down heavily on the godly soul, and that inhibits the godly soul from being able to express itself and to communicate. There's no phone wires. You have to develop those phone wires. There's no direct communication between you and your godly soul. So you need to develop that. You need to reach out to it and raise it and nurture it and sort of bring it out of its, bring it to the forefront. Those who are not in touch with that part of themselves don't really know what's going on. And it's not an abstract concept. There's a lot of people that are completely disconnected and oblivious to a lot of things that go around them in the world. There's no one that isn't more aware or more awake in one place and then more sleeping in another. And I'm talking about like in the real world. There are some people that are more musically or artistically aware, but mathematically completely inept. And there's some people that are the opposite. Right? You have linear people and geometric people. You have people, right brain people, left brain people. There's always someone that's more awake in one area and less in another. It's very rare that you find people that are both artistic and mathematical at the same time, are both intellectually intelligent as well as emotionally aware and in touch. So this is examples of just, it's normal. It's normal when you develop one side of you, so then the other side goes to sleep, and the opposite. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify my answer. I don't know if I was saying necessarily the belief in God, but more so
the belief that there's one God that creates everything. It's not like some intermediary
It's-
or whatever. It's more
It's a very good point.
that might not still be the point, but I just want to clear.
No, it's a very good point. But then you'll have a problem with number 2. Do you have the text in front of you?
Which you're saying. what
Do
I
you have it?
believe
Do you have
is
the text?
second one?
What?
Yeah.
What do you have as the second? You want to read it?
I believe in complete faith that the Creator, blessed with His name, is unique, and there is no uniqueness like His in any way. And He alone is our God, who was, who is, and who will always be. You're saying that's the idea.
So that's more accurately translated, unique. But most people translate it as being, in other words, those who translate the first one as being belief in God. So then the second one they translate as the oneness of God, which also can be translated as unique. But for the purpose of this class, it's better to translate it as unique. There's another one also. Where is it? Well, the fourth one also, that he's the first and last, which is difficult to understand even on a basic level. What does that mean, first and last? But yeah. Either way, with number 2, you'll have a problem, because then it would seem redundant. No.
Yeah.
Okay. So where are we?
On the first one. That's
Right.
the-
Good. Okay, so if we understand that we can't really write in Torah that someone should believe in God, so therefore it must be something else. So if we look more carefully at the text, it's more obvious. The text is very specific, and it's not just flowery. In other words, it isn't adding more text for the sake of poetry, but rather it's very specific, and that is that we're supposed to believe that God runs the world, that He creates and guides all creatures, and He alone made, makes, and will make everything, both in the past, the present, and the future. Which means that the first principle is not belief in God, but belief in a primary cause, or that God is the primary cause. So the first question is why do we have to say this? Why do we have to believe this? Why is it important to believe that God creates, and will create everything? Why isn't it okay if we say that God is running the world, but he didn't create the world? What's the difference if God is the CEO if He didn't found the company? What's the difference? He's still the boss, right? What's the difference if, like, it was originally founded by who knows who, whatever, and then the company was bought and merged and whatever, and now it's being run by this CEO and this board of directors. Same thing with God. What's the difference if there was another God and He created the world, or the world's evolved over billions of years, and then God also evolved together with it, and then He took over because He's a God, so He decided to take over the world. Another scenario: why can't we say that God has always existed? Because the first one is a little bit too, sacrilegious. So let's get a little more religious here and say that God existed and He always existed and God is infinite and so on and so forth. And He created the world in 6 days, just like it says in the Torah, et cetera, et cetera. And then he retired. And He created a creation department. And He created lesser gods, or administrative angels, ministering angels as they're called, which exist, and I talked about, and we welcome them every Friday night to our table, and they are put in charge of creation, or maintaining creation, or recreating, whatever, which is a lot more easier to swallow. So what is the imperative to say that God always existed? He's the primary cause for everything. He created the world, And then he continues to create and will create everything. In other words, not only do we say that he created everything way back, why did he box himself in this way? And why is it important that also, even if all that is true, and all that is, we can explain why God did it that way and why it's important and so on. Why is it important that we believe in it? How does that help us in our daily lives, in our daily struggles, and so on? That's right. I'm struggling with traffic. I have bills to pay. I've got stuff in my head. I've got not feeling well. I've got a headache. Whatever stuff's going on in my life. How does the fact that God is creates, and will create everything in the world? How does that knowledge? How does that faith help me with any of the stuff that I'm dealing with today? Okay. Yeah, decent questions. You were waiting on a question or something?
So I was gonna give an answer.
Ah,
So I don't think
sorry
I
if I
answered
stole
it.
your answer. was your answer? Did I say your answer, or do you have something else?
Well, it was more to like the first thing that you said, like why can't we say that there was like somebody else that made the world and then like God took over like the CEO?
Yeah, why? Why can't we say that?
Because then that would mean that there was some other force other than God. That has to like.
But he died. The first God died.
I don't
No?
have more. But he's the only one that ever was on the wheel.
That's what we believe. But why do we have to believe that? Or why does it have to be that way? Like I said, the first option was way too out there. But I was just saying it just to stretch your mind a little bit and say, who says it has to be that way? Why couldn't it be different? Just in order to understand why we believe specifically this way, you have to ask a question and say, why couldn't it be the opposite? Yeah, obviously it goes against everything that we believe, but why? We need to try to understand as much as we can. Someone else is waiting. You're waiting. Yeah.
I feel like I'm just not vibing with this.
Which part?
All of it.
Mhm.
I don't know. I think maybe, I don't know if it's just because a God being there wasn't ever a concept in my life until very recently. It wasn't denied. It wasn't an atheist kind of thing. It was just not a concept. So it's sort of hard to grasp living for so long and just reading something and being you have to believe in this when I haven't understood that concept my whole life.
So how did you understand it up until now? Where are you starting from? That God lives on a cloud somewhere with angels and harps and stuff?
No, I think it's more I was trying to figure it out, more from a textual base.
Mhm.
Okay, God created the world, but then the more we're talking about it, it gets more ethereal almost. Oh, he's everywhere. It makes me feel I'm in a TV and he's watching and controlling and puppets and that kind of a thing where it makes more sense to be okay, God helped make this happen, or God helped do this, or God talked to Moses, but the idea of saying believing in just God and all of the things that it's saying, believe in me and doing all this, it's not that I would go and believe in another God, but it just feels I don't know, it's selfish.
It's more comfortable for you if he's a little bit at a distance,
Yeah.
or that he's in the stories, or what's called he's the God of history.
Yeah, so it's and then I can still it still makes sense to be oh, this makes sense, I don't know, this happened, so maybe Hashem didn't have this planned. But for me, it's more of from the beginning of time, Hashem created a quilt, and from our view, we only see the back of the quilt, we don't see the whole picture.
Mhm.
And it's weird for me to think that it's something that's still present, I guess.
Right. Makes sense.
It is, but it's more of pre-planned out, it feels like like still there and existing.
So you'd be
but-
more comfortable saying that that the world is like a big merry-go-round, right? You ever play in playground and merry-go-rounds? You get on, and then someone has to give you like a big push, right? And the harder the push, the more that you spin, and the faster you spin, right? So God created the world. He gave it this colossal godly spin, and it's still spinning.
Yeah, sort of.
Right. Or another option, or it's not, and which is not exclusive from the first option, is that he got everything in motion and then he gave over things to other people or other beings, other whatever.
Yeah.
So this is not an unintelligent option. As a matter of fact, this is exactly how idolatry started, paganism started. There's the whole religions that started exactly from this approach. That in the generations between Adam and Noach, in the first 1,000 years of the world, so the people at that time decided or came to the conclusion that God has placed the administration of the world under other beings, and they're intelligent beings, and they're administrators, and they're administrating the world. And so originally what they said is that God gets involved in the big picture stuff, right? He comes down when there's like a sea to split, or like, plagues to bring, or, big natural disasters of biblical proportions. But then the day-to-day stuff is run by what's called the Kachavim Mazales. You have the sun and the moon and the stars, right? You have a person's zodiac, you have a person's what's called in Judaism, a person's mazel, and you have different administrating angels for every one of the different nations of the world, and then you have the sun and the moon and so on that are in charge of the seasons and the weather and so on. And all of this is what either brings abundance and goodness to this world, or the opposite. And so therefore they to begin with, they didn't stop believing in God. They believed in God, but they believed that he only gets involved when there's like a big issue, which is like what CEOs do. They're involved in the big strokes, and then the broad strokes, and then the little things they give to upper management, the middle management, and so on and so forth, and it trickles down. So what ended up happening is that they started talking. In other words, if you have something that you need, you don't go to the president of the United States. You go to the office that deals with that particular department, right? Right. Every department has their own thing. So you go and you talk to them, and so the same things with the people of the world. That's what they did. They started talking to the sun and the moon and the stars, because they were involved in the day-to-day administering of the world, which makes sense. And then after a long time, people forgot about God entirely, because the conversation was only with these intermediaries. And in order to make these intermediaries more tangible, so they created images of these intermediaries, right? They created images of the sun and the stars and different things. And then they created different images that reflected the sun and the moon and the stars. And then as the generations continued to roll on, so there was no remnant whatsoever of God at all in this whole scenario. There was idols of things that are compared to celestial beings or angels or whatever, and that's who we pray to. And then God fell off the table entirely. And this is the way it went until it came along. This went on for thousands of years, and everyone did this. This is like, it wasn't like different. Now we have all types of different religions, and everyone's doing different things. This is every single person in the world believed in idolatry. They believed in serving all of these different gods. So much so that they had books of gods. It says when Moshe came to Paro and he said that God has sent me to tell you that you should let my people go. So he says, who's your God? What's his name? We have the book of gods here. We'll look it up. We'll look him up. We got all these different names, and we'll see if this one. We'll see who is your God. And everyone. This is what everyone believed in. So what's the problem with that? No, I'm not talking about the pirate. I'm talking about going with this This is what what they went with in the beginning of creation. What's the problem with idolatry? The truth is that it's all true. There are things called mazales, the zodiac. There is the sun and the moon and the stars, and they are intelligent beings, and not that they have free choice, but they are in charge for the most part on a tremendous amount of blessing or tremendous amount of abundance, or the opposite, that's given or that's poured into this world. It's a real thing. So I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Yeah, I feel like as you're saying it too, like I realized it's sort of like I feel like this first part that we've seen is sort of like when you have a teacher, or maybe you're at work and you have a boss and whatever, and then all of a sudden some random Joe off the street is put in as a substitute, or some random Joe is like, okay, I'm gonna be the boss now, and you're like, what? Like, I do everything I say, listen to me, without saying why. I feel like this is just saying, listen to me, do this, I'm the boss, but it's not saying why, which is why I feel like maybe it sits straight. If a random person came in, you didn't know that what their qualifications were, how much they studied, and they start talking about something and saying, you should just believe in me. You're like, well, who are you? And I feel like it's just missing the why component of why do we
we'll definitely get into the why. The question is why. My question is to what you're saying about what you're saying is why do you look at it that God is the Johnny come lately? Why is he the one that just came in? He's the one that's always been there. It's the others that you
I feel like just for my life though, I'm thinking more of I haven't really had that sense of a God being there, and then all of a sudden there's some new guy coming in and say, believe everything I say.
Right.
And I've gotten on board with a lot of it because I hear the why and I see how it affects me and that. But
100%, the why is very important.
Yeah.
The why is very important, and that's what I started off with. That we have to, we must understand whatever we can, because we can't live our lives with just because that he told us to do so and whatever. And that's really my question. Why can't we say? That's how I started out. Why can't we say that there are things out of his influence? Why do we have to say that he created everything? What's the big deal? He could be the God, he could be the CEO of the world, but he didn't create everything. He could be the CEO of the world, and he created everything, but he doesn't continue to create everything. What does it mean that he continues to create everything anyway? I mean, isn't the world already created? Aren't things sort of running on their own? And why is it imperative that he continues to create everything in the future? Why did he box himself in that way? That everything that's going to be created are things that he has to create. So, in order to begin to answer this question, which will probably continue next week, but just to or finish next week and move on to principle number 2, God willing, is very simple. It's really a very, very simple. It's a big concept, but it's really a very, very simple concept. Take my trusty box of tissues here that helps me out every year. Okay, so we all believe on one level or another in this thing called gravity, right? So gravity dictates that the only reason why this tissue box is suspended in space is only because I'm holding it. Now, does anyone on any level believe that if I let go of the box, that it won't fall to the table? Anyone think that's possible?
In the earth, no.
No, not even. Yeah, right here. Just this box, this desk, me here holding it. So I'm holding the box. If I let go, it's going to fall. It's going to hit the table, right? Gravity. Okay, fine. Now, let's say, however, that you were born after I lifted this box. I lifted this box, and then you were born. And your entire life, you've never seen the box fall to the table. You've always seen it levitated in space, just the way it is. And it's been like that for thousands of years. It's just always been here. It's never fallen. and you were told that, and you see other things that fall, but this isn't. This is still here, and this is all you've ever known. Does that change the rules of gravity? Does that make it that is it not obvious that the reason why it's here in the middle of the air is because I'm holding it, and if I let go, it's gonna fall. It doesn't make a difference how many years I've been holding it or how long it's suspended here. There's a reason why it's suspended, which is again because I'm holding it. It's obvious to anyone. And as soon as I let go, no matter how long I've been holding it for, no matter how much dust is collected over this example, it's gonna fall. Anyone disagree? No? Everyone with me? Okay. So let's prove the theory, and I'm going to let go of the box, and the box is going to fall, which we all believe with complete and utter faith. Good. Okay. Faith has been proven. Now, why does anyone believe any less in the fact that the world and everything in it needs to be constantly held up? A tissue box needs to be held up, but the world and the entire universe and everything in it doesn't need to be held up. And it's just randomly floating in space and orbiting and with a tremendous precision. Tremendous precision. So much so that it took thousands of years for scientists to come up with instruments to measure the precision of the movements of the planets and the stars and the universe. And these far out, the far reaches of the universe is something that we haven't even finished to explore. We haven't even gotten to the end of the universe. But all of that is just randomly happening and all randomly just suspended and also orbiting and moving and so on in this incredible orchestration of movement without any maintenance whatsoever. Nobody has to change the battery. Nobody has to wind the clock, but everything is moving with awesome precision, with more precision than anything that we've ever created here in this world. And for some reason, that's okay. And that makes sense to us that we can believe that that's all happening and it all makes sense. And it was all happening because God created it and then just gave it a spin. And it's all still here thousands of years later without any maintenance or any support whatsoever. Even though the tissue box, no one here, even for a second, thought that I'm going to let go of the tissue box and it's not going to hit the table. It's a very strange thing if you think about it. Why would we believe with complete faith that the tissue box would fall and hit the table, but we don't believe that the blue marble, i.e. the globe, the world we live on, is going to one day fall out of the sky or fall out of space or fall out of orbit? Why doesn't it? Why wouldn't we assume that we're doing that? Or that could happen sometime in the future? Yeah?
Well, we can see if we let go of the tissue box that it's gonna fall. But like we've never invested ourselves. We've never seen what happens if like Hashem stops creating the world.
So I'm here to explain to you this concept called yesh ma'ayin. And for those who are not familiar with Hebrew, so in Latin, it's called ex nihilo. This is for all those who speak Latin. A lot of books, they translate it in the Latin as if like that's like more, understood. It's a funny thing. What?
I see ex nihilo a lot, and I'm always just like.
It's Latin. Yeah. Yeah. It's like telling a person, asking a person if they want to put on tefillin, and then if they don't know what tefillin is, and they say, "Oh, it's phylacteries," because
Just say the words.
because phylacteries is something that that people understand. I'm sure that if you take a survey, more people in the world know what tefillin are than phylacteries are. But whatever. At any rate, the point is that neither one of the phrases are completely understood. And what it means is that something from nothingness. Now, something from nothingness is an extreme concept, much more than any of us are really thinking. We all say that as an expression that I made this from scratch. That I pulled this out of my hat, that I made this out of nothing. But it's not nothing. We don't make anything out of nothing. We make things out of other things. We repurpose things. So there's this famous joke about the scientist that finally came to God and told him that he can take a vacation because they figured out how to replicate the creation and how to create human beings and so on. And he said, and God said, "Oh yeah, that's really cool. Like, well, okay, show me." So they said, "Well, we can replicate, your creation of mankind, and just like it says in the Torah that you did it, that you gathered earth from the different parts of the world, and you did all these different things, and then you animated man, and then he became a person, a living being." So God says, "Okay, no problem. If you can do it, then I have no problem taking a vacation and giving it over to you." So the scientists start collecting different types of earth and different types of soil from different parts of the world to put together this form, this shape of man, just like God did it. And so God said, "Wait a second, what are you doing?" So they said, "Well, we're following what it says, that you gathered earth from," and he says, "Yeah, that's true." He says, "But get your own earth." So this is what we do. We repurpose things and we say we're creating things. And we are. There's a creative process. There's no question. There's a creative process. And we're repurposing things in ways that weren't repurposed before. And that's innovative and very exciting. And certainly, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, that's a real thing. And God put us here in order to innovate and to expand the universe and so on and make people's lives better. But everything that we're doing is all repurposing and reconstituting or putting together different things that weren't previously put together. Creating something from nothing is true nothingness. True nothingness is not something that's easy to fathom because we have no example of nothingness. There's no time or space anywhere where there's absolutely nothing. So this is something that we sort of have to just accept or understand that before the world was created, there was nothing. Not nothing, outer space, nothing. That's also space and time. Beyond space and time. There was nothing. And God created something out of nothing. And the rules of something out of nothing is that if it wasn't here before and God compelled it into being, it has to continuously be compelled into being. Just like the tissue box needs to be held, and if not, it'll fall. So too also something that wasn't there and then God compelled it into being, it has to be constantly compelled into being, ongoing at every second. And if even for 1 second God no longer compels something into being, it'll cease to exist, just like the tissue box will fall. Anyway, we'll continue talking about this next week, God willing.